Good afternoon. I'm going to give a bit of a talk about Arch Linux and how we work together as a group and what's good about it as a Linux distribution. I've just worked out it's a bit after midnight in my time zone, so I'm half awake. So I'll talk about Arch Linux and how we develop it, how we try getting the community to join in with developing the distribution, and what our plans are. So first, a bit about me. So I don't do computers during the day. I'm a geneticist by trade, but I've been helping develop Arch Linux for about 5 or 6 years now. My roles in the distribution, I package the new toolchain, so the C compiler and the libraries and the linker, and I am one of the developers of the Pacman package manager. So, Arch Linux. This is from our website. We claim to be a versatile and simple distribution designed to fit the needs of a competent Linux user. And we try to keep it lightweight and flexible so that you can make whatever distribution you want out of Arch Linux. You can install whatever software you like. Amazingly, that graphic turned out better than I expected. So there's a large number of Linux distributions out there. So DistroWatch tracks about 320 active Linux distributions, and they have another 340 on their waiting list to be confirmed as Linux distributions. And essentially, there's just many variants of very similar things. So if you can see, there's this nice timeline picture you can get online. It doesn't show entirely well there because it's absolutely massive. But you can, what it shows is Linux distributions over the last 20 or so years, how they split off from each other and how they're all related. So up in the top right there's a whole bunch of Debian derived distributions. There's a cluster for Slackware and Red Hat down there. So Arch Linux has been around for about 10 years, a bit more. There's quite a few distributions that are now splitting off from Arch Linux and trying to serve a particular purpose. Chakra's a more well-known one who's trying to make the best KDE desktop distribution there is. There's also Parabola Linux, which aims to only provide free software, so no non-free stuff in there. But you can see we really did pick up popularity about 2007, 2008. Not much happened in the first 5 years there. So given there's these 700 or more Linux distribution, we think what really separates out the Linux distributions from one another? And I had a brief look around, and what I think it comes down to is pretty much these 4 things. What sort of target audience they're looking for, what sort of hardware they support, their software selection, and how they manage their software. So many Linux distributions claim we target very beginner users. Your grandmother could use this Linux distribution. And others say we're for the more experienced Linux distribution, Linux user. I'd say Arch Linux claims to be for a more experienced Linux user. There's Linux distributions that are for use on your desktop, and others that are aimed more at server usage. Arch Linux can be used for both, but using it for a server might not be the best idea, so we're more aimed at the desktop user. And then you get distributions that are used for things like rescue systems, or mainly aimed at people for very specialist purposes like audio, processing or image processing and things like that. Another thing that separates Linux distribution is what computer architectures they support. Arch Linux supports x86, primarily i686, which is Pentium 2 and above, and 64-bit architecture. We do have spin-offs that support ARM hardware, and I think there's still a PPC version going, and maybe a Spark one. But yeah, we probably focus on x86 hardware. As far as software selection goes for Linux distribution, quite a few focus on one particular desktop environment. So that's what you log into your nice graphics screen where you can click on all your software and everything. Arch Linux doesn't have a default desktop environment. In fact, when you install it, the first thing you end up is in a terminal with no graphical environment installed at all. But we do have support for pretty much every Linux desktop available. We do have quite a bit of specialist software there, mainly because we have people join the team that say, I'm really into audio software, I want to package it for Arch Linux. Also, we have a lot of people doing scientific research involved as well, so they package a lot of the software they have. We have no real objection to including proprietary software in our distribution, so you get things like Flash, which is nice. And Arch also doesn't have a default file system. Some distributions make a big deal about that, but I don't really see the point. What I find one of the major separating features of a Linux distribution is how they manage all their software. So there's two ways to think about it. So from a distributions point of view, that's how often a package is updated, when a new release is made of the software, and how long they're supported for. But also from a user's point of view is just how do you find and install software, and how can you keep your system up to date. I'm going to talk a bit more about package management. So there's really two release models for Linux distributions that are around. What's known as the standard release model, mainly because almost everything uses that model, is a big release gets made, say, every 6 months or a year. I think some of the more common ones are 6-month release cycles. And until the next 6 months, you only get security updates. There's generally not new software. So if there's a nice new version of something you want to install, you either have to wait until the next major release or get it from unsupported sources. The other type of release model is a rolling release model. Now, I had a look in Wikipedia. Apparently there's 6 different kinds of rolling release model, but I think someone probably just had too much time on their hands. Essentially, it comes down to your software is continuously updated. When a new version of software gets released, it will make its way into the distribution. So there's no waiting every 6 months to get new software. Also, because everything's continuously updated, you never have to reinstall or do a big update, because as long as you keep updating regularly as the new software comes up, there's no real major change to the Linux distribution. One disadvantage of that is if you're getting new software very quickly after it's released, it might not be as stable and as tested as on a 6-month release cycle sort of distribution. So what happens for the major distributions that do have a stable point release every 6 months or a year is in the background they have some sort of rolling release model going on where they update all their software, and to a point they say, okay, now we're focusing on stabilizing it before release, no new software until that's done, then they make the release. So the rolling release model's more what happens behind almost every Linux distribution, and some just use that as their main focus. So Arch Linux really focuses on rolling release. When new software comes out, we want it in the repositories straight away. Typically within a few days of release, although given some of our developers have quite good interactions with the upstream software developers, they can be in there within minutes of the software being released. And we also don't keep old versions of software available at all. It's the new stuff or nothing. So software management, I think, is probably one of the more important aspects of a Linux distribution. Essentially, in the Linux world, there are two main sort of software management systems. There's the RPM-based one that's used by Red Hat and OpenSUSE and distributions like that. And then there's the Deb format, which is used by Debian. But there's literally, again on Wikipedia, there's a list very long. So everyone likes their own, as does Arch Linux. So we've developed a new package manager called Pacman, imaginatively. Why we did that, this happened a few years before I was involved, but the aim is to have a very simple package format that was easy to deal with, but also to create an easy-to-use system to create those packages. Because if you can create packages easily, it's a lot better for people to contribute to the distribution. One of the great advantages of the Pacman manager is it is very fast. And this is one of the things we actually focus on during development, is improving speed. And it's not just me saying it. Linux Format magazine had an article on different package managers and said it's definitely one of the fastest by a long way. And it does everything a package manager should do. So you can update your system, install the dependencies you need for it, etc. I'm going to talk a bit about how packages are created for Arch Linux, because this is one of our aims, was to make it as simple as possible to create packages, and that way the community can contribute very easily to their package for their favorite software. Essentially, if you can build software, install it manually, you can create a package for it in Arch Linux. So, in general, software is installed in about those 5 lines. There are exceptions where it's a lot harder, but a large portion of software, you just use tar to extract the source code, go onto the directory, configure, make install, you're done. So we wanted to keep that simplicity while building packages. So to do that in our package format, you first separate out the bits that you run as a user, so building the package, and the bits you run as the root user, which is installing, and separate them out into a simple batch function there. Now, our package building utility is called makepackage. It handles quite a bit of the stuff that you'd have to do all the time for you. So it extracts the source code into a directory called source dir, so imaginatively named. So it's as simple as changing into that directory and running the commands you were running. Once you've done that, the only real change is to install it into the directory that the package will be created from. Again, nicely named package directory, package dir. So once you've done that, that's pretty much the entire packaging process done. And then you just have to add some annotations so your package manager knows something about the package. So we give the package a name, a version, a release number, which is internal to the packaging, not to the software. Bit of a description, say which architectures it runs on, and then things like its URL, its license, what software it depends on, and the source code, where to download it from. And that's completely creating an Arch Linux package. And so Make Package tries to automate a lot of stuff for you without really hiding it too much behind the scenes. So it does many common tasks that you might want to do, like stripping all the debug symbols from binaries, because if you're distributing those packages, debug symbols really increase the size overall. Same with compressing man and info pages and setting all your nice compiler flags and things like that. So once all the files using your package function have been installed in this package dir, we put a single annotation file in that directory consisting of all the package name and the version and that information before. And then that's just compressed into a tarball, and that's it done. So the package format is as simple as it can get, I think. I don't think we could remove a lot more unless you were manually having to resolve all the dependencies off your software yourself and figure that out. So it's about as minimal as it can get. So the really nice thing about this is the package builds are entirely written in Bash. So anything you do in a Linux shell, you can do in a package build. There's no restrictions there. But it also means that when you read a package build, they're very, very easy to interpret. And there's no special syntax or anything to learn beyond normal Bash. So that makes contributing package builds for any software very, very simple to do. And we really want to work on simplifying it further without losing the ability to just look at a Bash package build and understand it. So one of the things that's about to be released is using, so if you're building a software from a developmental version and you've downloaded the source from Git or CVS or SVN or any of those sort of version control systems, instead of having to do all that download and everything in the package build, just providing it as a source URL, and Make Package will do that behind the scenes for you. So I'll talk a bit about how we put Arch Linux together and what we do sort of behind the scenes to make the distribution. We've been given this label community-based. I'm not sure what that means, except no one gets paid to work on it. I think we have a couple of sponsors that provide a server or two for us, but other than that, it's all volunteer work. For a Linux distribution, we have a relatively small team, and I was actually surprised by the numbers that we have officially. 33 developers, 37 trusted users, which I'll go into later. Plus we have people that help moderate our forums, our IRC channel, people who I think do something in the background on the wiki, not entirely sure, and people who help us track all the bugs in the software. So it's a reasonable sized team in the end, but we also try getting a lot of involvement from our users to help us do a lot of the development. So the developers' roles are to maintain the absolute core of the distribution. We also make decisions that would affect the entire distribution and maintain packages in the two primary package repositories we have called core and extra. So core provides essentially everything you need to boot up your system and build more software. So it's a very small, select set of packages, only about 200 in all up. And all these packages go through a much more thorough testing than anything else in the distribution, just because they are so critical to having your computer boot up. So if we make a big mistake in one of those, the computer might not boot up into Arch Linux anymore. So there is a lot of testing that's going on. Then we have the extra repository, which aims to include any software that's fairly widely used. And so a rough guideline is if 5% of the people use the software, it probably should be in this repository. So that includes things like the major desktop environments, things to play your videos and audio, major programming language interpreters, and Office suites and everything like that. We have a second group of people that work on the distribution that are called trusted users. Now, these historically were completely independent from the main distribution and run entirely separately. They're a bit more merged in with the main distribution these days and have become an official group of people involved. So they try to provide more popular software. 1% of people must use it, sort of thing. Yeah, it's just a rough guideline. But essentially, anything they're interested in, these people, and it's not already in our main repository, they can provide it. And there's about another 3,000 packages there. So the pathway to becoming a developer for Arch Linux is not actually overly onerous at all. So first up, essentially, you have to be contributing to the community in some way. And that can be providing package builds for software that isn't currently packaged, or helping out fixing bugs around the distribution, writing a wiki article, helping out on the forums in IRC, but basically just being seen to be reasonably knowledgeable and helpful around the place. Then there's a process to actually apply to become a trusted user. Essentially, you find someone who's currently a trusted user and say, hey, I've been helpful, will you sponsor me to be a trusted user? And they go, okay. And there's a bit of voting that goes on, which for most people is just a formality, and that way you become a trusted user. Then to actually become a developer, you need to be invited onto the developer team. It normally works that we have an area we need some help in, and we notice this person's been helping out in that area while we've needed a hand. We say, hey, why don't you become a developer there? So there's no real application process or selection process there beyond. This person seems to do what we want, let's bring them on board. When I was writing this up, I actually realized that we have very little interaction with other developers overall. Like, I was absolutely amazed there was 30 odd of them. I probably talked to about a third of them at most. But it actually works quite well despite the lack of interaction, because each developer has a set of packages that they are interested in and want to maintain, and they can do that relatively independently. If there is going to be a change that affects more than the set of packages the developer's involved in, they just give a bit of a heads up to the other developers and trusted users saying, we're going to have this change. Be prepared for it. You might have to adjust your packaging. So my role is and as far as packaging goes, I package so the tool chain, so mainly the compiler and the new tools and the C library. Auto tools are all the things that make configure scripts work and make files work, and also a bunch of the core utilities you need to build software. So if I'm going to make a change or another developer is going to make a change that requires other developers to adjust their packages, we have a sort of internal to-do list system that goes on. So I'd say, look, I think probably can't read that. One of those is we've got a library update coming on, so libarchive's got a major version update, and all software that links to it needs to be rebuilt against it. Another one of these is some big changes have happened to the Mesa package, so that's graphics OpenGL library, essentially. Something's happened to that, and so there's instructions for people on how they should fix their packages to deal with the changes that have been made. So when we're wanting to make decisions as a group or make very major changes to the distribution, we have an unofficial sort of process of how to do that. Essentially, you just send a mail to our public development mailing list saying, this is the change I want to make. These are the technical reasons why it's better than what we currently do. And essentially, if no one disagrees, you're allowed to do it. We rarely use a formal voting procedure. So one example of this is we've recently transitioned to using software called systemd. It's been reasonably controversial over the last couple of years in the Linux world, I think it's fair to say. Essentially, systemd's an init system. So that's the first process that started during boot up, and it spawns all the other processes you need to boot your system. It had some nice benefits in that it can start up all the different services. So a service might be the daemon that runs your printing service in the background, one that keeps your time up to date, scaling off CPU frequency so your computer doesn't overheat all the time, things like that. So it can start them up in a predefined order, but also multiple at the same time. So you get quite a decent speed increase in booting your computer. What was quite nice for Arch Linux also was that it has a predefined configuration mechanism to tell systemd which things to boot up. You know, also specifying your time zone, your computer's name, the language you're going to use on your computer and things like that. They're all defined standard configuration mechanisms that were beginning to get used across multiple distributions. So it was good to have that unified rather than every distribution having their own way to configure things. So when systemd first came out back in 2010, there was absolutely lots of work to make it work in Arch Linux. Arch Linux was using its own init system for that time. And there's a quote from the person who did most of the work that he's highly doubtful that it would ever work with Arch as it is. But over the years, him and a couple other people put in a lot of work to getting it going. And the standard configuration of the Linux system became seen as quite an advantage, and it was something we would like to get, you know, almost all Linux distributions having the same configuration. It makes it a lot easier for users who want to switch or just have to help out a friend with another Linux distribution, if everything's configured different, that's really difficult. So the init system that Arch Linux was using at the time made a lot of changes to become more aligned with what systemd was sort of creating as a standard way to configure things. And we started using the systemd tools to help out with that configuration. So setting your computer name and your time zone, all tools that came from systemd. So as that progressed on over the next couple of years, systemd became stable and started getting used by other distributions as well. And we were finding that our old init system was having more and more bugs that were having to be fixed by using systemd tools anyway. So we might as well just start using systemd instead of our old init system. And another good thing is the service files, so they're the files that tell your systemd to launch a particular program, started becoming included in upstream projects that needed them. So instead of having to write our own files to do that sort of thing, tell cups that it needs to start so you can print things, that sort of thing, they were already being supplied. So it made a lot of sense for us to start using that as our init system. When we did decide to do it, saying there was a lot of controversy was a bit of an understatement. We actually closed down our mailing list for a couple of days just because it was really unpleasant, would be one way to put it. So people liked our old simple initialization system. However, yeah, we made the decision based on technical merits, not based on what people like entirely. And I think people have become more comfortable with it since it's been enforced and there's nothing else to use. People have started using it and realized it's not as horrendous as they made out, maybe. Or else they all moved to another Linux distribution. So, given the development in Arch Linux is kind of separated by people doing their own thing, and it doesn't entirely, not a lot of interaction between developers. I was writing this and I was going, how does the distribution actually fit together? And the key point is, when we're creating software, or when we're packaging software, we don't make any changes to it, or absolutely minimal changes to it from how it's supplied by the developer of that software. So, because we don't have any such changes like that, that means the software works entirely as the developer wanted it to work, and any other pieces of software it interacts with, that interaction won't be altered in any way by how we package it. And so things just work together for the most part. Now this keeping software as close to what the developer releases it like as possible means that the only real patches we include in our distribution are to help building software when, because we have quite very up-to-date libraries and everything, occasionally software won't build against new versions of it, so we have to make some changes to fix that. But that means that any bug we find in some software is probably not our fault, probably. And so then we can just blame the upstream software developer and actually work with them to fix the issues rather than trying to fix them ourselves. And that's a good idea because the person who writes the software probably knows it slightly better than people who just package it. So this interaction with the software developers, I think, is becoming a very big strength of Arch Linux. So we try getting any bug fix we make, so if we have a reported a bug or a security issue in a piece of software, we always try to contact the developer of that software to ensure that our fix for the issue is a good fix and it's one that I'd recommend. That means that we actually contribute, the Arch Linux developers and even the users of the community know that to get stuff fixed, they really have to contribute back to the original software rather than coming to us and saying, please fix this. So the Arch Linux community is becoming quite well known for its contributions to software development. And also, a lot of the Arch developers have direct commit access to a whole bunch of software. And because we don't make any changes like that, Arch Linux actually is becoming quite a nice choice for software developers. So this is off one of the Linux kernel maintainers' Google Plus page in the last couple of days. So he uses Arch for something anyway, on a shiny new MacBook Retina by the looks of it. Also, I was talking to people about their interactions with upstream software developers, and I was being told about a couple of people who develop software actually follow the Arch Linux bug tracker, and when they see a bug for their piece of software, they've had it fixed and released a new version before the bug actually gets assigned to the Arch Linux developer. So that's becoming more and more common, and the interaction with software developers, so it's actually quite helpful. As a community-based distro, apparently, we strongly encourage all our users to contribute towards the distribution. There's many ways you can do that. Our forums and IRC channels are very well known for providing help, provided you show you've put some effort in to solve the problem yourself. For us, you get told to read the documentation. Also, there's a way for users to contribute package builds for their nice favourite piece of software, which I'll go into later. Our wiki documentation is becoming very thorough. In fact, quite often when I'm searching for a solution to a problem and I go into Google and type my problem, I get pointed to the Arch wiki anyway. And I think this is because that we do keep our software as close to as it was released as possible. So anything we write about how to use the software in Arch Linux more than likely applies to most other Linux distributions as well. And also there is people out there that do provide lots of things, like there is an Arch audio group that provide a lot of software for audio things that I know nothing about, but apparently it's important. And people do provide things like there's a talking version of the Arch Linux installer for blind people that's been supplied by a community user. And I think there used to be a games repository, although I think that's mainly merged into the main ones now. But there's a lot of involvement of the community. Now, I think because they're creating packages for Arch Linux is so simple, we have a very extensive collection of community-maintained software, community-maintained packages to supplement software from the official repositories. So in the main repositories there's about 6,000 pieces of software, which isn't too bad. It'll contain the vast majority of what you need. But you know, there's always something else that you want. And so this Arch user repository, anybody can submit these package builds to the repository. So in there, there's over 40,000 packages with new ones arriving daily. I had a look at the stats and there was about 170 for the last week, new ones submitted. Constantly updated and very well maintained, actually. Some software is in there multiple times, so 40,000 is not a real number of the pieces of software available, because people like to package things like developmental versions of software, make a package with very specific configuration options and things like that. So yeah, this is entirely unsupported from an Arch Linux point of view, but it's entirely community supported and reviewed. And every time I go there, I'm reasonably surprised at the high quality of software high quality of build scripts that are in there. And the community also provides many tools that allow you to install software from the AUR as simply as you would normally maintaining a package. As I said before, our wiki's becoming very good in terms of providing information on software and how to configure it in the Linux world. Already covered that. We do have spin-off distributions that are providing packages for different architectures. So one of the best known ones at the moment is the Arch Linux ARM group. They actually, well, there's only 2 distributions mentioned on the Raspberry Pi page, and it's one of them. So I think the Debian-based one's the more recommended one. But there's other people out there, as I said, there used to be, or I think it's still going, a spin-off to provide binaries for the PowerPC architecture. I think someone's working on a Spark one as well. So. Okay, I was asked to talk a bit about what we're going to do in the future of Arch Linux. And so I emailed people and said, what do you want to do? Pretty much the response I got was keep updating packages. So I'll talk about that in a bit more. But people also said, I want to focus more on this particular area, get the software more developed. I think we're getting quite a lot of Chinese users, so software for input in different languages and dealing with that is becoming more of a focus of various people. I actually cover those later. So keeping packages updated. I went, well, that's pretty boring actually for a thing you want to do in the future of the distribution. But then I thought about it, and it's actually what we do that most helps all other Linux distributions. Because we get any updated package into our repositories within a couple of days, quite often we're getting it into what we consider our stable repositories before most other distributions even get a testing version of it in their developmental version of their distribution. So their users won't see this software for a while. So our community gets exposed to bugs in software the first. I suppose that doesn't sound like a good thing, but typically they're pretty minor issues. But that means that we can identify these issues in software, contribute them back to the developer of the software saying, look, this is a problem with your software, you might want to fix this, and then that fix gets handed down to other Linux distributions. So keeping packages updated is actually more of an important goal than what it really sounds. A lot of the developers also want to add more architectures. So at the moment, we've only got 30 x86 variants, so for 32-bit and 64-bit, and our distribution. As I said before, the ARM guys the Arch Linux ARM group do a very, very good job of maintaining their port of Arch Linux. And we're sort of having talks with them slowly to see how they can become a more official Arch Linux project. whether or not that happens in the next year, we'll see. Potentially could happen more when 64-bit ARMS hardware comes out, and then they can start on that fresh and join in. And so we'd really actually like to integrate more variants of more computer architectures in. And that's exactly what happened with our 64-bit architecture. It was initially just run by community members who ported all the software over themselves, got the packaging up and running, went, this is really good. Then the hardware became more common and it got merged into the Arch Linux project officially. So things like that do happen. Another thing we want to do is continue simplifying the file system. And this is something that actually quite a few distributions are starting to do. So there's actually a lot of redundancies in the common Unix file system. So this is just a sort of brief overview of the layout of what we've got there. So essentially, in your root directory, you'll have this lib folder which has essential libraries, apparently. And in the user directory, there's another lib folder that has the rest of the libraries. Defining exactly what essential libraries is makes little sense as far as I'm concerned. So what we did is move everything, all the libraries, into the user lib folder and just make the lib directory in the root a symlink to the lib folder. And other distributions have done this too. I think Fedora maybe has done it now, and others are looking at it. And the same thing goes for all your executables in your Linux distribution. So there's the bin folder, which I looked up the definitions of all these folders because I actually have no real idea how to separate them. So that's for essential user commands. SBin is for system commands. User bin is for most commands. This is taken directly from the file system hierarchy guidelines. And user SBin is non-essential system commands. Essentially, how you choose what is a system command versus a user command and which are essential and which are non-essential is kind of made up. So there's no real point of it. So instead, we just install, so we're working on this. This is going to happen in the next couple of months, is install everything into the user bin directory and make all the other binary directories point at user bin. And then they're all just in the one place, and we don't have to think about whether something's essential or a system binary or anything anymore. Another thing that gets mentioned a bit is that the etc directory in the root is supposed to hold all your system configuration files. Now, there's actually beginning to be a push in the Linux world to not have your configurations files placed there by default, but place them in somewhere like user lib and then the package name. And then anything in the etc directory overrides the default settings of the software. So you just put overrides or any changes you want to make to the defaults there instead of having the entire configuration file there. Now, this is something that would be really, really handy on a rolling release system, because if you update a piece of software and its configuration file changes, on a rolling release software system, you get that update straight away. So you then have to merge in all the changes you've made into the other version. On Linux distributions that release every 6 months, you just deal with configuration every 6 months when it's made, rather than having to do it on a not quite daily basis, probably weekly. I'd see one of those. But this is something that really will require us to work with all software developers to actually achieve. But I've seen this on plans for other Linux distributions as well, so hopefully that's something that can be done. one thing that I'm focusing a lot is simplifying our packaging system further. Now, it's already fairly simple, as I went through before, but could be better. Nothing's ever perfect. So there's things we could simplify, like the example I gave before. It was entirely built with configure, make, install. There's a whole heap of software that's built like that. So the point of having everyone repeat that for their software, for their packaging, they shouldn't have to, essentially. Same with, for example, Perl modules. The entire build system for Perl modules is essentially the same for every single one. So we should provide a way to do that in a simple way. The only thing we want to do is when we provide it, we still want to keep it as a nice bash script to build the software so you can just read it and run the commands yourself. So we don't want to have special functions that hide that behind the scenes. Other things we want to do is things like when you install a font, the font cache has to be updated so you can use it properly. When info pages are installed, there's a directory that holds a list of all those info pages that needs to be updated. So if we could have that done automatically, that'd be great. So these are the things we're working on there. Another thing that gets mentioned quite a lot is automating a lot of the packaging, which would be good because that would allow us to spend time on other things. So essentially, when a major library update happens, you need to rebuild all your software against the new version of the library, especially because in Arch Linux we don't keep the old version of the library around at all. We just delete it and move on. So essentially you just have to rebuild all the software, which could be entirely automated in the most case. Most software tends to just build nicely against new versions of the library most of the time. And also, there's a lot, especially if we start bringing in more architectures into Arch Linux, you don't want to have to build for the i686, the x86-64, whatever, going down the line. It'd be nice to just build for one, and then it should all just work for the rest, is the theory. And it applies to most packages. There's no specific changes. And that seems to about round up my talk. Thanks to the organisers for flying me over here to talk about this. And also everyone on the Arch mailing list who responded when I queried about things I should include in my talk, even if I didn't use a lot of it. And the Arch Linux community for everything that they contribute towards the distribution. Thanks.
Okay, so now we have 5 to 10 minutes for questions. Okay, so anyone has questions?
Hi. Why was there, as you said, a change to systemd if, as you said, Arch wants to be part more architectures? Systemd is only for x86. Why did you add it to the core system if you want to port it?
So systemd had a lot of very nice advantages for us. Specifically, it's being used by many Linux distributions now. It's been using by more and more of the main ones, except Ubuntu's using its own thing. That means it gets a lot more testing than our old init scripts did. So hopefully there should be less bugs. Also, it means that we can work more with other Linux distributions, getting all the service files included in upstream software, so we don't have to write our own. The ones we had to write for our old init system looked, yeah, they weren't great. It's one way to describe them. So really, the advantages far outweighed any perceived disadvantages. Also, I don't think the backlash against us moving to it from users was as big as it seemed, because only people who really dislike an idea will make a big fuss on a mailing list or something. And so, despite there being literally hundreds of email posts, it came down to a select few users that generated most of them. So I don't think it was, so overall it was a good idea to switch, I think.
And if you don't mind, you said that Arc has a port to ARM v6. But yesterday I was in a workshop with the Raspberry Pi co-fundator, Rob Bishop, and he said that they prefer Raspbian, Debian, and that distro over Arc because it is optimized to Arcv6, and that Arc it's optimized to, I think, that v4. Is that true or partially?
Well, if Rob said he prefers that one, I'm sure he does. So, yeah, on their website, the Raspbian or Debian-based version is listed as their preferred one. From what I've read on the website, it's because that's a lot easier to install. Arch Linux doesn't tend to provide a nice, shiny point-and-click installer at all, so it's a bit more difficult to set up. If there's other reasons for choosing the Raspbian over Arch Linux ARM, I haven't been involved in that enough to know.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you think that, as you said, Arch Linux Wiki is becoming more and more a source of information for all Linux distributions? Do you think that Arch Linux might be the next Gentoo? Like, that's where all the distribution that all experienced Linux users will look for help or to base upon?
Yeah, so Gentoo used to have a brilliant wiki, probably one of the best, and then
they lost
the server crashed and they didn't have a backup. So the Arch, and also it took them quite a while, as far as I know, to get their new wiki up and going, as in several years, quite a while. Yeah. So the Arch Wiki's really filled in that gap a lot, I think. As to whether more experienced Linux users will use that over Gentoo, depends if they like watching things compile.
Compile, yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, I think also Gentoo has the use flag system, so you can really customize the software to what you want. Whereas, binary distributions such as Arch, you get what we provide you unless you want to build it yourself. So we are attracting a few more experienced Linux distribution users, but there's still a place for Gentoo as far as I see. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm over here. Hi. Yeah. You were talking about the community-based programming, and I'm interested in what are you guys' day jobs, to say like that, because I'm really interested in development stuff, but somehow we have to pay rent too. So what do you guys actually do for money?
Yeah, I don't work on Arch at all, like as a job. I think I've had 5 books off my wish list donated to me over the last 6 or so years. So really not in it for the money. And we really have no company behind us to offer sponsoring for any developers at the moment either. So although it'd be nice to spend, lots more time working on Arch Linux, yeah, everyone does another job to pay the bills, and this is more a spare time sort of thing. Yeah.
Is it usually in the IT branch? People program for a company that has projects for big companies and free time for Arch Linux?
Not so much. We have people working quite a variety of jobs, from a lot of academics that I see. In fact, I'm not sure what half the people do as a job that are involved in it. So, yeah, I don't know anyone who's actually paid to work on it at all, or in any form. So, yeah, it's entirely volunteer-based as far as I know.
Hello. Yep.
Yeah, found you. Good.
You mentioned in one of your slides that the AUR contains wrappers that allow to treat it as just another repository.
Yeah.
I was somewhat surprised to see that. Would you consider that a feature? And I'm asking this because I distinctly remember not every time, but a lot of times a user complains in the forums that, oh, I have installed this package and something bad happened, and then they paste the line that they used to install it, and it goes something like Yawurt-S something.
Yeah.
People tend to complain, more or less bitterly.
So, it depends is the answer. Some of the software to help use packages from there is very simple, as it'll just download the package build and source files you need, and then you build it yourself. Others, you like that Yawurt, or however you pronounce it, try to automate updating all the software and pulling it in its dependencies. Historically, that particular piece of software had a very bad name because it didn't do what it was supposed to do very well. I think that's improved a lot, but still, yeah, as far as from an Arch Linux point of view, those are entirely unsupported ways of installing packages. But some of them do work quite well, and I do use some of them, so,
May I ask which ones, by the way? You were talking about Pacman wrappers.
Yeah. So, as far as Pacman wrappers go, Yawurt's probably the main one, but I've never really used it. So there's one called Cower to download the package build and you build it yourself. And that's very simple, and that's what I tend to use to track those packages.
Yeah, but with Cower you have to take care of the dependencies yourself, right?
It will download the lot of them in one go, though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think there's other wrappers around Cower that do all the building in one go if you want it. But yeah, I don't tend to use them that much. Yeah.
Okay, so no more questions?
About the wrappers, for Pacman, do you intend to bring PowerPill? Do you know PowerPill?
Yeah.
To bring those features of downloading simultaneously all the packages, so we don't have to wait, since Pacman tries to be the fastest package manager.
Now, that's an interesting question. So
why not?
What PowerPill does is downloads all your packages simultaneously, so you get multiple going at the same time, which should be quicker. I think we may bring in something like that. I know we're definitely switching to the parallel downloading version of curl, which is our download library. So that's at least going to be available. Whether we actually use it to its full potential is another story. We tend to argue that you have a mirror pretty close to you, so you should be able to saturate your bandwidth anyway, downloading a single package. But I'm told that's not always the case. So maybe. We have to figure out how to do it while still keeping our nice download progress and that. So it's something that is definitely flagged for the future to do more parallel operations right throughout the Pacman code base. So it's a possibility, but it's, yeah, not one of my priorities. So
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
So it's okay now? Okay. So thank you very much.